Still back? Yay! I'm still Hannah Azia-Poole, and I'm still Artistic Director of the Bernie Grant Arts Centre, and I'm still delighted to welcome you here tonight. As I was saying, we exist to create space for Black narratives to be told. We believe in a world in which Black artists no longer have to fight to have their voices heard. And nowhere represents that better, really, than tonight's event. So firstly, I just want to say a huge thank you to the artist BAF and to Anthea and to the whole Uprise team for letting us be part of this incredible project. 10 years ago, just after the uprisings had happened, there was a town hall meeting here at the Bernie Grant Arts Centre. We created a place for the community to gather in fairly neutral territory to kind of unpick what had happened in the week before. And so for us to be able to return and revisit that space now here is really important. A lot has changed, but frankly not enough. And so that's why it's really important for us to have these conversations and these gatherings. So please sit back, relax, enjoy the evening. We have got plenty of time for Q&A. Some things we have to do a little bit differently because of COVID, so just respect those new, slightly strange things and respect each other. But it's going to be a really incredible conversation. So now, please give a beautiful Tottenham welcome to our chair for the night, Dotun Adebayo.
Thank you. I don't need this just now. And thanks to Hannah. Thank you very much to BAF and the entire Uprise team. Welcome to you if you are watching this online. This is a digital interactive experience as well, as is the whole Uprise exhibition. I've been watching it myself and it's amazing for those of you who haven't seen it yet. It's a real pleasure to be here, not least because I'm from Tottenham. I grew up in Tottenham. I've lived in Tottenham or thereabouts, certainly from the time I moved here. It was 1968. So the events of 10 years ago were very pertinent to me. In fact, I did a radio broadcast from here for BBC Radio 5 Live. So this subject and the surroundings are very familiar to me, as they are to our guest tonight, who I'll introduce one by one. Franklin Boateng, also known as the King of Trainers, is here. You might want to explain that in a moment or two, Franklin.
Thank you.
Professor Patricia Kingori is here with us as well from the University of Oxford. And the filmmaker Jake White, who some of the films that we've been watching, he's been involved in as well, is here with us as well. Jake. Please be seated. So as Hannah said a moment or two ago, we're happy to take questions as well. I think let's set our stall out first of all. The question that's been asked tonight, and let's not forget what was behind it. What was behind it was the killing of a young man in Tottenham, and I'm very much aware that his family are still campaigning to get whatever justice they believe has not been served yet in this respect. Having said that, it started here in Tottenham. It was a community narrative that stretches back, as those of you from Tottenham will know, or wherever you're from. Riots, if that's how you want to describe it, are nothing new to the United Kingdom. The first race riots that I've been able to trace back to started during the First World War. There were several at that time. But this was different. This was very, very different. So, how did a community narrative turn into a national conversation? I'm going to start with you, Franklin, because you were not very far away from what was happening. You were at your parents' house on West Green Road.
Yeah. So I live in Tottenham. Well, I've moved to Enfield, but I grew up in Tottenham. My office is actually here at the Bernie Grant Centre. When the riots actually started to happen, I was the person who set up the Tottenham Riots hashtag on Twitter, and I was reporting what was actually going on because the BBC and other news outlets were saying kind of the false narratives. So I was kind of instrumental in trying to give a clear voice and a true voice of what was going on at the time. And then, lo and behold, like the BBC and other outlets started to report what I was saying on social media at the time. So that's kind of how I played a part from a social media point of view.
And when you look back at that, was that where the national conversation about what was initially a very Tottenham, if you like, or London-centric narrative began?
Yeah, I mean, social media played a massive part because people can, before social media, like the other riots were shown by the TV, and the TV and media, they will have their own agenda of what they want to show. But I think having things like Twitter and Facebook and things at the time, it did allow people to kind of conversate and really look at what's actually happening in real time. So that the conversation was spurred along with social media, I believe.
And Professor Kingori, as a sociologist, you, I suppose, understood where the narrative emerged, or what the ongoing narrative was, both locally and beyond that. How did that very, I suppose, very local conversation become a national one? Do you recall what people were saying at the time?
Well, firstly, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out in the rain. I just want to give a bit of context to my work. So part of the reason for me being invited here is I'm specifically interested in trying to understand fakes. It's a bit of an obscure focus, but actually, I think that if you pay attention to fakes, they can really teach us a lot about power in society. So not only who gets to say that something is fake, but also what is real. And one of the things that's very common now is this concept of fake news. But actually, we know, and lots of marginalized groups know, that fake news existed long before Donald Trump started talking about it. And we've got in the, as Franklin was saying, in the example of the Tottenham riots, which I actually feel uncomfortable calling them that. I think they're actually protests. I think that's the first fake news, move, is one of the examples of fake news and the way in which the mainstream media projected an image of kind of senseless violence. It wasn't just actually even a national story, it was actually international stories. I had colleagues overseas saying to me, kids in London are so well off that they can afford to be rioting over their Blackberries, and this is the image that was projected. It was completely removed from the social justice arguments and the root of all of this. And I think, what Franklin was saying was that actually we saw the beginnings of people actually being able to have a voice on platforms other than mainstream media to say, actually, there's a different narrative and we're trying to change that narrative. And I think that was the beginning of something quite important. And we've seen the threads of some of that now with the way that, in recent weeks, with the way that the English football players were treated and how they've used social media actually to get their stories across. So I think this idea about protests actually gives us a much stronger insight into actually what's happening, rather than just looking at it in riots, because for me, calling them riots is to detach it from the sort of social justice
Indeed.
Arguments that were going on at the time.
And Dr. Kingori is absolutely right, Jake White, to talk about the international perspective, because the year before this, we saw what was known as the Arab uprising, as some people describe it. And certainly that would have been the beginning, certainly in terms of an international perspective, if I'm correct, I might be wrong in this, the beginning of sort of civil unrest in the digital age as we know it now, perhaps. As a filmmaker, what was your part in that digital age of civil unrest?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. And to answer your question, back then I was 19 years of age. It was a BlackBerry era. And my involvement in the film industry had only really started at that point because I came together with a bunch of other young people. Kyle here was one of them at the time. We were young. But yeah, we came together to be a youth-led production company, and we was working on one project, and then the riots happened to happen at the time when we was planning something else. And because we were all young people, there was about maybe 30 of us, and seeing the news saying what they were saying about young people being feral thugs and whatever else, I was sitting in a room with Kyle and the other people like, we're here, so what's going on? But in terms of the social media, civil kind of uprisings and stuff, BlackBerry was the thing, because I remember getting broadcast messages of people saying, oh, it's kicking off in this area, people are running up in shops and whatever else, come down. Me personally, I didn't want to get involved. I was quite on edge because I didn't really know like what to expect. And being someone of mixed heritage, like my dad back in the day had to deal with police brutality and all of that stuff. So for me, I think to answer your first question about how can it go to an international conversation, I think the fact that what happened to Mark, and then the fact that it happened in Tottenham, an area where other people over history have sadly suffered the same fate, it's like, well, this is one step too far. Well, you know what I mean? Like, it's like enough is enough. And then we wanted to come together and kind of put out a message for a solution and not really look at a blame game with what we did.
Let's dispense with the formalities and have the real conversation, which is what we saw in 2011, amongst other things, was the fact that it was laid out in the open for everybody across the country to see via social media, via independent film sources, via the opportunities that technology gave us to see that many people in this country, and particularly many younger people, have no trust in the government, that they felt marginalized, and they felt as if the authorities were the problem. That was nothing new. That was nothing new in 2011, because you could argue that was the reasoning behind the 1981 riots in Brixton, celebrating or marking the 40th anniversary of that this year. That was arguably the reasoning behind the Tottenham riots as well, of 1985. And yet then the difference was we, ordinary people, didn't have the access that your generations have now of being able to say, no, this is what's going on in our communities. So what then, given that, what was the central position in new technology? How did that enable the civil unrest that spread from the N17s to the N18s and beyond?
I think it's, we have to be clear that to say that the phone itself has become not only a tool, but also a way to kind of protect ourselves. So when these things happen, the phone is also used as a way to capture the real time. I've grown up in Tottenham since I was a kid, and I've been stopped by police many a times, armed police, asking me if I've got guns in my car, etc. If I had the phone as I have now, I would have been able to take evidence. Does that make sense? So now when it comes to rioting and things like that, people are able to take evidence and really see with their own eyes, oh my God, this is actually happening. This is not something that you read about. It's actually real time happening. And for me, when the riots happened, it was a way for people to see what we go through, what we're actually faced with. you know, to actually have a kind of eye window, whether it's through a BlackBerry, through an iPhone, or on the internet, to have a capture of what we actually have to go through as young black men in London and beyond London. And that's why I think a lot of people kind of related to that, you know, via social media. That's why it spread so fast. Like, they were like, what's going on? And, you know, and everyone was kind of frustrated and upset with that. So they saw technology happening and, you know, I don't know if I can say aiding, but, you know, it kind of played a part in the truth.
It's a double-edged sword, though, isn't it, Patricia? It's a double-edged sword. When you talk of fake there, what was happening was the narrative is still owned at this point, not by the police, because they were one step behind the curve in dealing with, or in understanding social media. Arguably, they've caught up since then. But the media, the established media, then were able to show what they wanted to show. The new technology enabled them to show what perhaps they wouldn't have been able to show before, and to spin a narrative on it, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these things, you know, like I said at the beginning, what I'm really interested in is in power, and power doesn't really give away power very easily. So even as much as there are these technologies that allow you to record, all of that can be manipulated. I mean, we've seen that with what's going on at the moment with the vaccines and the misinformation around the vaccines. What I'm really interested in is a report that came out by the Countering Hate group that looked at most of the misinformation and the sort of social media information that black people receive, which is misinformation about the vaccines, independent of where you stand or whether you should or shouldn't have the vaccines. Just looking at the WhatsApp groups, the Facebook groups, things that are sent to you unsolicited. When they've traced that back and look at who's funding that, lots of that is funded by far-right groups, right, who actually don't want, who are arguing that they don't want black people to be vaccinated. Now, what I'm saying is that looks, and that the style of that is often black people talking about ill effects that have happened to them or to people close to them. They're often in very sort of emotional accounts of bad things that have happened after the vaccine. And that is precisely to appeal to the sort of the networks and the caring networks that black people have to protect themselves against false narratives. So you have this double fake, right? You have a false information that's given, but people are also faking and pretending that this information that they're sharing is done because they care about people of color. And I think actually we always have to be mindful. So I think that the technology, the recording, the sharing of videos is really important, but it's got to a point now where even that can be manipulated. True. And you can be sent something that you think, oh my God, this has definitely happened. And actually it's just a load of rubbish, and that itself is fake. So I think at all times it's always about us questioning what is really going on here, who stands to gain from this particular story, what, you know, and just to have that really critical relationship with all sorts of information that we're given. I think that's the point. You know, lots of people, I mean, I remember growing up, and I'm sure there are people here who can relate to this, watching the TV with my mum and her like kissing her teeth going, where they find this black person from? Like watching it thinking, this is all manipulated. Like how, I don't even know this, anybody like this, right? And knowing that I go around to Irish friends of my house, of mine, you know, when I go around to their house and them saying, why are they always interviewing Irish people outside pubs, you know? And just all, if you're from a marginalised group, you've always looked at the news slightly like, this doesn't, there's something else, there's a bias here. So we know that, but what's happening now is that those same groups are also infiltrating lots of the social media platforms to present fake news, but packaged as if it's designed for us, by us, which it isn't. So I think at all times it's just about having constantly critical discussions and questioning who stands to gain from this particular piece of information.
How can we ever know? How can we ever know, for one thing, who has the power in any particular situation, but also who stands to gain from it, whether it's fake or not?
Well, I think that's another question I don't necessarily have the answer to, because it's always different groups. But, you know, when we're seeing these stories and when we're seeing people pushing for social justice, and I appreciate there were some elements of what happened 10 years ago that were also, regrettable with the looting, but for the vast majority, that was a social justice protest. And when we see how that was depicted, we can ask, we know what that's about. That's about discrediting, and that's the same that happened with Hillsborough. That's the same that's happened, in many, many other types of, even with Grenfell, we're seeing people, all this discussions about, is it a fridge? Was it a fridge just set it off? I mean, what was the cladding doing there? We know that often the way that these things are presented is to precisely discredit that social justice angle. And that's been like that always, right? If someone has power and you're questioning that power, then one of the tools is to discredit what you're doing. And that was the same 10 years ago. But now social media has changed that, but we have to constantly not just take things as given at face value, but to keep asking questions of it, I think.
Jake, you're nodding up some of the stuff Patricia is saying there, and as a filmmaker, you're not just a filmmaker, by the way, you're a writer as well. As a writer, you can control the narrative to a certain extent. As a filmmaker, I'm not sure if you can. When you look back on the cinematic narrative of 2011, when you look back from the perspective of today, do you see the citizen journalism of video cameras on phones, for example, do you see that as an asset in the cause, or is it something that has inadvertently, but nevertheless, held back the cause of justice?
I think it's a tricky one to answer because you can look at it in different ways, but from my own personal view, I think nowadays, where you've got things like Instagram Live, Facebook Live and stuff, like I could be walking down the road, there could be a woman being harassed by someone, it gets a bit mad, and then I film it as much as maybe call the police firsthand, but then through me filming it, I'm actually gathering evidence which then could be used to prosecute whoever, and then you can apply that to anything else, racism and whatever else. In terms of nowadays, I think as a filmmaker, you do have the power, but it's about how you use it. So and what message you want to do. Like the production company that I'm with, we primarily look at issues that affect young people specifically because we're youth-based, and we always search for solutions. So when we make our films, we do all our research in whatever department that we're making a film about, and we try to make sure that we come across as unbiased, because it's very easy to find a bias in anything in life, really. And I think the best ways to find solutions in things is to look at the whole spectrum and not just one section of it. And in regards to the uprisings and stuff, what we did with the documentary we made, some may know it, it's called Riot from Wrong. And we made sure that we spoke to every single person involved in the riots, from members of Mark Duggan's family all the way to people who were out doing whatever, to people in the courts, to police, etc. We even went up north because it kicked off up north and stuff like that too. And it's about conversations. So when we had our screenings, we had over 100 screenings throughout this period of 2-3 years around the country and stuff, parts of Europe. But we always have Q&As. And that was the best part of it, because for me, not to say I got bored of watching it, it's a great film, but I really look forward to the Q&As afterwards, because you don't know what kind of conversations are going to come about. Two people in the crowd can end up talking to each other afterwards. That could lead to a new movement made or whatever. So it was that kind of thing. And it has been very effective in a way. And yeah, just to kind of summarize, I think there is a power that media production teams have. When you want to talk corporate like BBC, they have agendas. But if you're raw, organic, then you really have a true power. And nowadays with the phones, it's even better, because it's anyone can show the truth if it's in front of them and they have the know-how of, oh, if I actually film this, it could spark change. Do you know what I mean? So it's George Floyd, for example, rest his soul. Without that being filmed, none of those protests last year would have happened.
And of course, that's the connection that I'm going to make very shortly. Let's pause with the Black Lives Matter conversation of the last couple of years, arguably. Let's pause for a moment, and I'll return, if you don't mind, to the subject of, you said you went up north, and things were kicking off there as well. Of course, they were kicking off all over the country. And that is part of this conversation. It's an important one. I can't wait for the Q&As either, so do bear with us, and we'll get to your questions as well. But take us back, Franklin. What were the local issues that made this particular protest widespread? What was the local issues? We know that they were sparked by the death of a young man at the hands of the police. But what else was going on? If you didn't know Mark Duggan, if you didn't know that situation, why would you have vented your frustrations?
That's a good question. I mean, to be fair, growing up in Tottenham, there's so many issues. Like, you know, it's a historic distrust of the police. It's a historic being lied to, being kind of victimized. You know, so a lot of those issues are underlined anyway, and they haven't gone away. You know, I think sometimes we may talk about the riots 10 years ago. They're still here right now. Young boys do not trust the police. The majority of people get stopped are young black boys. Do you get what I mean? They're victimized, they're picked on. And these issues have been historic since the 80s. You know, I remember being, I think the first time I got stopped, I was like 6 years old. Do you get what I mean? In the 80s, so it's not gone away. And these are the issues that were underlined, in my opinion, you know, and this is speaking from first-hand information, you know, growing up here. So it was just like a tipping point, you know, and you know, for people who lived in Tottenham and beyond, I don't think it's an enclosed feeling for just Tottenham, you know. But in Tottenham, because it happened here, and historically we're known for being victimized by the police, etc. It was just like, you know, it's kind of a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a kind of explosion of all the things that we've been through.
Patricia, there must have been some moments that, looking at it from the outside, that even that particular situation in Tottenham must have looked somewhat incongruous when things were kicking off in parts of the country where there wasn't a black community, for example, and yet it was connected. How can we make sense of that?
Well, it's the same way that the people who, you know, the Hillsborough Family Foundation reached out to the people, the Grenfell supporters, you know, when people see injustice, they see it, and there's a connection to it, independent of whether, you know, you're in Egypt, or whether you're in Palestine, or whether you're in London. The people can see and resonate that those sense of injustice can resonate to other parts of the country, to other parts of the world. So what you're saying, you know, this is happening up north, and we're thinking, what's that about? But unless you live in those places, unless you have those kind of interactions, then you can't see what they see when they look at what's going on in Tottenham. But people can see those things. People feel it, you know, we feel it in the same way that we felt what was going on with George Floyd. We're not living in America, but we see injustice.
Is the difference then seeing it through the medium of social media, seeing it through the medium of a camera phone? Because arguably everybody else should have been seeing the injustices that black Britons were going through in the 1970s and in the 1980s and in the 1990s, but it didn't resonate in that way.
I think there is something to that. I think there is something about when things are made visible, then people can have a connection to it. You know, it's become increasingly hard to hide kind of mass injustice because of everything, you know, that we were talking about, that people can film these things. Now, you know, whether those things actually, all of those things end up in protest movements, you know, and we've seen recently, you know, with the death of Sarah Everard and people taking to the streets about that and how they were treated by the police. You know, it's actually about how when you can connect with people, when you can see actually, you know, yes, they're different, but actually the issues are really similar. We're dealing with similar issues, even though we're different parts of the country, different parts of the world. It's about power, basically, and misuse of power or perceived misuse of power, and trying to just get some sort of human dignity and be treated with integrity. That's what people want when they take to the streets, and people that can resonate, you know.
And that was the thing with George Floyd, wasn't it, Jake? We'd heard about lynchings. Billie Holiday sang a very emotive song about lynchings. Anybody who's heard Strange Fruit couldn't possibly not know the human suffering and carnage and the complete inhumanity of a lynching. We'd never seen one. Never seen one live on our video phones or mobile phones or otherwise. We'd never seen one, had we? And yes, Rodney King was a beating, and you're quite right to bring that up. There is, it does resonate, you're absolutely right. But I don't think we'd ever, well actually, I think you're right. I was thinking about the way that the power was being, you know, what they call white privilege now, but the way that the power of the policeman in the George Floyd case was almost nonchalant. I think in the Rodney King case, it was in the dark of night, and it was the first of those police brutalities that we'd ever seen, that the policemen didn't have any idea that people might be filming this. Something about the George Floyd case, Derek Chauvin didn't care if people were filming it or not. And I think the resonance of, in a country where one of the most infamous photographs of a lynching shows 1,000 white people gathered to have a picnic whilst strange fruit is hanging from the sycamore tree, as Billie Holiday put it. And it is almost that nonchalance about it that gives you a sense of the power dynamic. But feel free to bring up the Rodney King situation. We'll go to Q&As in a moment or two. But just on that point, though, Jake, the police also now use video cameras, body cams. Does it help? Does it bring justice to people who have suffered injustice at the hands of the police?
I'd say yes or no. It depends on the individual and the case that is at hand. So I can't really answer that straightforwardly. I think I would say, in terms of what we were just discussing, simple phrase that everyone knows, seeing is believing. So you can tell people a bunch of stuff, they can be like, oh no, but when you show them, it's like, oh wow. And quite clearly, in the case of George Floyd, for a lot of people, that's one too many. For some people, it's the first time, but everyone caught attention to it, and then things were done in response to it. In regards to the seeing is believing thing as well, with the documentary that I came together with my group and made, we did our screenings. We actually took it to America, and I was one of like 5 people to go. We went to St. Louis and New York, basically when Mike Brown and Eric Garner were killed. So I actually went to Ferguson. I saw seeing is believing. Obviously, I saw it on the TV and all this, and it hit me because I'm someone that feels passionately about the subject of police brutality, mainly because I just know my dad was beaten up for being a black man back in the day, and it just, for me, I haven't had no personal badness with police myself, but I don't have a liking of the police for that reason, at least the police system, not the individual officers. So going to there and talking to people in Ferguson about what happened to Mike Brown, it was mad because it was like, I'm hearing the similar kind of thing to what happened with Mark. And it's just like, to kind of answer another question that was, I can't remember what the words were exactly, but the first question about how does it go from public, like a community to the world, it just goes to show that, like, basically, if you want to look in what happened to Mark happened to Mike, it's the same thing in terms of the outcome. It's just done in a different way and under different laws and assumptions and whatever else. So it's very, I've kind of lost my trail of thought, but...
Don't worry. Do you want to pick up on that?
Well, I need to say, actually, that, we're forgetting also what's happened in Nigeria with, the pushback against police brutality there and all the videos that were circulating there as well. So this is just about, again, I keep saying, it's just about power and how people are trying to get, a sense of humanity and show, actually, this is how I've been treated in an unhumane way. So I think we're looking at the sort of these protests that are using as many different means as they can, including social media, to try and draw attention to something. But this isn't just a UK thing or America thing. This is a global thing, and people are using this all over. One of the things I found really fascinating was when the very first, I don't know if you remember this, but the very first doctor that came out of Wuhan, and he was sort of looking into the camera saying, there's this thing going on, and everybody's getting sick, and we need to do something, and he sent that out. And the first thing that was said about that video was it's fake. And this was when, nobody even knew what happened to him, right? But this guy was trying to say, help us, there's something happening here. And so using social media in that way to try and get attention now has become part and parcel of the kind of toolkit that people are using. But often what we're finding is that when people are doing that, they're being slapped with the fake news stories as well. So it isn't straightforward. But this is now a global thing. And, what we saw 10 years ago that seemed kind of novel, with people taking to Twitter and saying, look, this is what's going on, has now become kind of standard, and even to the point where it's even being sort of manipulated again. So.
And when you try to fight the power in that public enemy way, the power fights back. We've seen with BLM how that has now been manipulated to be not about black lives, but the suggestion that this is a political narrative. How could it not be? Out from birth, we become a political narrative, certainly in this country, but as you pointed out, elsewhere as well. But nevertheless, to be a partisan political narrative in that way. So I wonder at the end of the day whether, and I don't suggest for a moment that change cannot come out of fighting the power. It has. We've seen that in the civil rights narrative of the 20th century. But where we are today, with Black Lives Matter being regarded as something of a dirty word, unless black footballers score for England, I wonder whether power ultimately doesn't control these tools, these online tools that ordinary people have been given. Franklin?
I think the truth is the truth, to be fair. I feel that sometimes, like when it comes to George Floyd and other people who have been filmed being assassinated, you can see the truth. I think that's what it is. And sometimes the truth cannot be shushed or quietened down. And when you see it firsthand through phones and stuff like that, there's some things that can quickly be told as fake news, but there's some that it spreads like wildfire. You can't. The truth will always come out. That's my belief. It's like this gentleman in Wuhan. I remember like he's nowhere to be found now and stuff like that. But even that, now we know that's the truth. Do you get what I mean? So it will always eventually come out.
If we had taken what he was saying at the time he was saying it as the truth, how many lives would have been saved?
Yeah,
so
true.
actually, what happened was, in saying it was fake news, right, cost like thousands, millions of lives.
Indeed.
People were still getting on planes and they were telling us, no, it's rubbish, it's fake,
Yeah.
So I think you're right, the truth does come out, but at what cost and when?
That's true.
And we've seen that. I keep talking about Hillsborough because that's one of the most recent situations. The family have been campaigning for 30 years. 30 years you've got to wait for the truth to come out. That is the situation where, Mark Duggan and family, friends and community are in. It's 10 years, but they still haven't really got to the bottom of it. So, the truth comes out. But when you've planted these fake narratives, the victims have to work double hard to try and undo all of that to get to the truth, and that's the issue.
And I think you're quite right to bring up Hillsborough, by the way. I think you're quite right. The truth about the way an entire ethnicity of people are treated, though, it's less tangible, isn't it?
Is that a question to me?
Anybody? In fact, I'll turn to the audience as well.
Let's throw it out. It's a hard one.
The point I'm trying to make, Hillsborough is, and I'm not in any way demeaning the severity of Hillsborough, but that was an incident. Whereas I think the narrative of black people trying to get justice in Britain has been there since I arrived in this country. And that was
even
September.
Before,
But as far as I know, September the 19th, 1965.
Well, I can say that, because part of my family Kenyan, I'm half Kenyan, half Kittian. And, I had family members on my Kenyan side that were in concentration camps, and all of that was, denied and
British concentration camps.
British concentration camps, sealed up as official secrets, only just released in the last 5 years as truth. So all those years, 50-odd years, people have been told they never happened. The British have always denied it. So this is what I'm saying. The truth comes out eventually, but at what cost in the meantime? And, that's why I think it's so important that what's happening at the moment, where people are just jumping on and saying, that this isn't true, and showing evidence. I have a lot of, young people have been given all sorts of bad names and stuff. But one of the things that I think has been great about, millennials and Generation Zers and whoever else you want to call them, is that, their whole thing about going over people's Facebook thing and social media and saying, you're saying this now, but 10 years ago, here's a picture of you, at this party dressed like this, or you're saying this now, but let's find this other post that completely, and that work that they've been doing to actually show this is the other narrative that you don't want us to see. We owe a debt to them, because actually a lot of the stuff that has been revealed through that kind of, citizen investigation, people going on and finding that evidence in a way that we probably wouldn't be doing.
So just to touch on that, I actually done a TED talk here about 6 years ago saying that the government needs to start to put social media training in the curriculum, because it's like giving young people like a loaded gun and not knowing how to use it, and actually teaching young people how to use social media properly.
I'm arguing the other way, is that they can teach us actually how to
sorry. I mean, no.
It's mutual. That we need to know actually how to engage with this in a way that's a tool, so that we can, a lot of the stuff that we found out was, demonstrated in the Me Too movement, them going back and finding all sorts of pictures and things. To be honest, most of us haven't got the time to do, but really useful, and not taking it at face value. I think that's the point.
I just wanted to touch on the subject of truth and then also power. Firstly, I'll use a quote that I really love. The truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth. So you can apply that to whatever you want. And in terms of the truth, I think it's a thing of trust. Like, people who believe something to be true is because they trust it for whichever reason. So for those who don't trust it or don't believe something is true, it's just they don't have trust of the source, the person telling them the information or whatever else. But then if you go even further and say, do you trust the people in power who are trying to give you elements of truth or what is perceived to be true? And then that creates narratives. So like, just to use politics, I remember the first time Jeremy Corbyn went up for Prime Minister, everyone in London thought Labour would win because like majority of London was Labour at the time. But then you forget about the little shires and places up north where they don't really have much multicultural like people and stuff. So they're voting Conservative because they're getting fed whatever they're getting fed by the TV, aka the people in power who they perceive to be telling them the truth. And then they'll go online and see all these comments on Facebook or whatever, and they'll be like, oh no, no. I love reading the comment sections and things because you just really get to see people's perspectives.
Just a very quick question, then we will turn to Q&As. Do you, youngers, do you think that will change? Do you think that it's a generational thing? Because even in those shires, for want of a better phrase, and I don't mean to racialize it, but let's say the white shires, even in those shires, some of them experience uprisings 10 years ago, civil unrest of some sort, and they might describe them as riots as well. Some of them experience that, and if we're saying now that there was a generation that was new technology savvy, and as Patricia's been saying, if they're shown the truth, they won't stand for the injustices. Are we saying that when they become their parents, we'll be living in a land of milk and honey?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, it's impossible to know. I mean, that's the point about the future. But I think power isn't, everything that you said at the beginning, I really agree with, is that all sort of civil, the movement for equality in any sense is never a straight line. Power doesn't just say, yep, have it, you're right, you made a really good point there, thank you very much, I didn't think of that, and give you, let's have equality back. It's always a sense of making tiny bits of progress and then little bits step backwards. And, some of the stuff when we read from the 70s, 80s, 50s, go back, nothing we're saying here is new. We're talking about technology, of course, that's new, but none of these things are new. So why are we still saying it? Because we've been given little bits of freedom and it's been taken back, and then it's constantly about not accepting that this is how it has to be, but realizing that nobody gives over power easily. So I don't know what the future holds, obviously, I can't say that. But I do think that younger generations have been given different sets of tools, maybe, to the ones that were given.
I'm including you amongst the youngers.
That's incredibly kind of you, really kind. I'm going to take that. Thank you.
You're all youngsters in comparison to me.
But I think it kind of starts at the top, because we could talk about all these different injustices that have happened across the field, from racism, sexism and stuff. But I specifically, amongst all of that, look at classism. And I think classism is a bigger issue than a lot of people realize, because you're dividing classes, and then within the working classes, there's divides because of race, gender, and whatever else. So the people at the top, who are basically responsible for all of these problems existing somewhat, because if you were to trace back to the origins of who planted the seed, it would be someone up there. But then we're all arguing down here while they're just up there laughing at us.
I mean, you're talking to a sociologist here, so I mean, class is like, I remember someone coming, so I'm from a working class background, and I always say that because I think it's really important to say that and preface what I was saying. But I remember speaking to somebody, and they were coming from South America, and they were like, this is the only country where even the stamps have different classes. You know, like just this way in which everything just has, it just permeates every single thing. What supermarket you shop at, all of a sudden that you look at people slightly differently if they shop at Waitrose versus if they shop at Lidl or Aldi. Literally, it's crazy. It permeates everything. You know, and so I think you're absolutely right. We forget the social class element, and that is why I think some of the things that you feel strange, it resonates with somebody up north, does resonate, because there's a class issue and they can look at that through that lens and think, this is what we're dealing with here. Because there is that big class issue that unifies people here. Yeah.
You're 100% right. Sorry, Jim.
No, absolutely, I agree.
I was just thinking of Tottenham, this wonderful neighbourhood which made me and arguably made you, Franklin. Do you know, we have so many betting shops in Tottenham, and one or two of you might know the wonderful social campaigner here in Tottenham. I say no, like he's still here. He died at the beginning of last year, at the beginning of the COVID, Dougie Williams. And he fought a campaign to stop Paddy Power opening another branch.
Where Body Music
in
was.
Tottenham.
Yeah, I was there, yeah.
Another branch in Tottenham. And this is totally what you're saying, Jake, and that Patricia added to, that class arguably is a discussion that we should have here as well. But I'm going to allow you to take this discussion wherever you want to take it. It's a Q&A, and it's a Q&A not because, you know, I don't feel that you have statements to make as well, just because we don't have the time. So feel free to ask whatever you want of the panel, and if you can quickly make a statement within that, that's cool as well. But if it's just a platform, then I'll just ask you to be brief. So forgive me for that. Is there anybody who wants to start off this Q&A? Gentleman over there, and I apologise if I can't see very. Is it a lady?
We can't see.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologise. If I get the gender wrong, I apologise. And then there was a gentleman. Certainly, I can see you on the second row there as well. But sorry, you over there first of all. Ah, that's much better. Yeah, a gentleman.
Okay, the three things, if I may. The first one is fake news. Who checks the fact checkers?
Yeah, true.
That's one. Two, in terms of the local uprising that became national, three became international. The reason why was I was in Tottenham on the day. I left Tottenham to go see my family in Northampton. And it was my daughter who said, Daddy, Tottenham writes on the news. I was like, no, that happened in 1985. And then I realized that literally within minutes, a friend of mine called from the States in Denver saying, Livingston, you're on the news. Tottenham, came to Tottenham literally about a month before. And the third thing I want to make is in reference to class, how Tottenham is often stigmatized as a place never to be seen at, let alone visit. And yet now, the average house price is around £500,000 plus.
True.
That's what made those two.
Yeah.
Very good points, all of them. On the question of who checks the fact checkers.
I'm going to keep it short and brief. The people who check the fact checkers are the ones who write their checks.
Well done, that's a good one.
Patricia?
I don't know who checks the fact checkers. I'm not sure anybody does. They're sort of clouded in anonymity, and that's a big part of this question, right? Who's looking behind the scenes to see what's going on? I mean, I think part of the issue with this is I'm always conscious, like, of not sounding conspiratorial. I was on this sort of other panel, and they were talking about conspiracy theories, and they were saying how, you know, there's this sort of growth in conspiracy theories, right? So there was this massive conference in Cardiff just before COVID broke, and it was all the flat earthers who arrived. It was the biggest conference of flat earthers they've ever had. And so these people are all part of, and they're talking about this kind of growth of conspiracy theories, and they asked me what I thought about it. And my view is that most people who are part of conspiracy theories don't really feel that they're part of conspiracy theories, right? They think, actually, I've just got a different relationship to the news. And so I think that conspiracy theory, the idea of people having conspiracy theories is actually quite stigmatizing, because if you're from a marginalized group, you know, often you live to see that what you have as conspiracy theories are the things that come true. And the things that everybody's saying, well, that's a conspiracy, actually is the thing that you then proved 30 years later, in the case of Hillsborough, to be actually the case. Or, you know, in the case of all of these sort of state-sponsored killings of people, to be the case. So the fact-checking, I think, is problematic and people don't know. And at the same time, I realise that when we're talking about this, and we're saying we don't know, we need to know, we can sound as if we're part of a conspiracy, but what we're really saying is we need more information to trust you, basically. And I think that's the point.
Well, I know. I just wanted to say, hey, Livingston, how you doing? I just wanted to say about Livingston's point in terms of the house prices going up. I don't know if anyone knows that the cheapest house price in Tottenham Hale of the new residents is £380,000. That, you know, that's what's happening in London. This is part of the reason why a lot of us are upset. The average person who grew up in Tottenham may not be able to have a job that can satisfy that mortgage. These are the issues that we really need to address, and this is why there's so much unrest. They're building 5,000 residences in Tottenham Hale. You know, the cheapest is a studio flat at 380,000. Does that make sense? So these are all the issues. This is all part of why these things happen. Do you get what I mean? You know, I just hope that whoever's doing the developers, and I have been to a few meetings and things like that, but I hope they understand that by doing that, you're outpricing people who live in Tottenham, you know, and we need some sort of, you know, I'm not saying regulation to be like, look, we need places to live too.
In answer to who checks the fact checkers, shouldn't that be us? With all the access to social media and the research through that, which we didn't have, my generation. If your parents were lucky enough to be able to mortgage their house, they bought you an Encyclopedia Britannica set when I was a kid, and we all gathered round the one person who had an entire set of the Encyclopedia Britannica to do our homework. But the moment it was published, it was already old news, whereas now, to do anything, I look on the internet to reputable websites to fact check every single day. Shouldn't that be us? It's a question. So,
can I answer that just quickly?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure it should be us, actually. Like, I want to go and have something to eat. I don't want to be the person that also then checks whether that food's okay. Like, I think we have to, I do think we have a responsibility to be engaged. But I think who has the time and who has even the skill sometimes?
If it's about life and death, are you seriously telling me, Patricia, you don't want to know if that food you've eaten will poison you or not?
I want the Food Standard Agency to go in and check these restaurants and make sure that they're safe. I don't want to have to be risking...
But you can't trust them.
But then you trust the Food Standards Agency, which
they
is fine.
have to be independent and reputable. What I'm saying is I think there's often a sleight of hand that happens when we talk about handing things over to communities to check, because if something's missed, if something isn't acted on, then it becomes like your responsibility. There should be like an independent body that's separate from that where we can trust. It can't just be us all the time that's doing this work on top of everything else. What if we miss something? What if something is so what if something's verified that we don't have enough information to verify? You know, it can't. I'm really conscious when I say these things as solutions of not putting more labour onto people for them to have to find the resources to do. So I'm saying stay engaged and stay alert, and in the same way that, you know, if you go and you have a dodgy meal that you're supposed to let the council know and then they send someone out, I think there has to be something in between community and the news. I don't think that we can just be on us.
Then there would have been no riots or uprising or civil disturbances, because we'd have waited for the Police Complaints Authority, which is an independent body, to have done their investigation into the death.
But aren't they funded by the police, though?
I'm sorry?
The police, aren't they funded by the police?
No, they're not funded by the independent.
Independent, okay.
But nevertheless, the point I'm trying to make.
No, but we're talking about fact checkers, so that's something separate.
But
to
they
all
are the
of
fact checkers in that respect, aren't they?
We're talking about the news. So who's checking that what's been said in these forums is the case? I mean, I'm just giving my opinion. I'm always conscious that when people, it's like when people talk about, social services being stripped back and they say, we need to have more people volunteering. It's like, are you kidding? On top of everything else, you're saying that we have to then give more labour to fix problems.
That's very different. No, that's
I'm
very
not sure
different.
it is, actually, because it's putting a responsibility onto a group of people who have got, I need to have an independent fact checker checking that. I'm happy to do my bit and do alerts and say this isn't right, but I can't just be that you're saying that this has to be handed over to community groups. That's just my view, and I'm really open to hearing other people's perspectives.
So am I. I would say the Broadcasting Standards Authority is, if you like, the fact checkers of whether the media, the terrestrial media, get it right or wrong, but they are also dependent upon you and I to complain about something that we see to either be biased or wrong or otherwise. I'm saying if we are not there resolute as fact checkers, how can we expect any independent body to take up our complaints, our genuine complaints? Anyway,
I understand the point you're making. I would, I don't want it just to be like me and you.
No, not at all, not at all. In fact, sorry, the gentleman there, then the lady there, and the gentleman there as well. Sorry, so gentleman in the second row, first of all. Hang on, I'll get you. Take the mic.
It's good for me, yeah. Oh, look, man, you had your mask on. I'm cool. Okay. Okay, so today's conversation is about our story, yeah? And so when you're talking about fact-checking, we're here to tell our story, and we've just seen a presentation which is telling our story. Just recently, we lost Brother Menelik Shabazz, who told our story. And we're walking in his footsteps. We're walking in the footsteps of Brother Dougie Williams and of Sister Jean Binta Breeze, who we also just lost. Now, the panel has already agreed that the only thing that power respects is power, as Brother Malcolm X said. There's another thing that Kwame Ture said, which is that the powers that be make you think that you're thinking when you're just reacting. They make you think that you're thinking when you're just reacting. Okay, I don't know if people agree with that, but the reason I'm saying that is because we've got this thing going around in social media. It was mentioned earlier, the conspiracies, the perceptions about COVID and vaccines, and they're being directed at our community, which we know from the statistics is more likely to die from this thing. And I'll finish on this note. There's a well-known brother in the community round here. I won't name him, but if your world is basketball, then you'll know him. He was in the news last year, and the news story, the tagline was that 37 of my close friends here in Tottenham have died from COVID. Okay? And this brother is probably our generation. Right? So that's the reality of the problem. You talk about truth. The reality is this thing is killing us. And many of us have been convinced, all generations, that the virus is fake, the vaccine is fake. So we need, do we need to address that? And the final point I'd like to ask the panel, is there a conversation to be had about the economic and political impact of uprisings, i.e., some money appeared after 2011.
Yeah, the Regeneration Fund, I remember.
There's some money, and a lot of the money didn't go anywhere near our community.
Correct.
And there was a fight around that. And by some strange coincidence, the local authority tried to sell the public housing to a private developer.
Correct.
And members of our community managed to gain power in that local authority. But then a few months ago, they were removed from power. And the people who were in power before came back in. So that's a political conversation and an economic conversation, which is the conversation they've been having in Brixton about the, 40 years since that uprising. Should we not lose sight of the question about the economic resources that we're not having? I mean, why do you protest? Because you don't have resources, economic resources, political resources. So let's not just talk about communication and media. Let's talk about the jobs, the businesses, and the resources that we don't seem to be getting even when we rise up and protest. Thank you.
Can I quickly just touch on fact-checking? With facts, like, everyone's got a different perception of what a fact is. There are some outright facts that are just true. So, like, for example, if I jumped off a 500-foot cliff, I'm probably going to die, not survive. That's a fact. But then Arsenal's the best team in England. That's a fact to me. But to someone else, it's not.
You're in Tottenham, man. Come on.
I know. But I'm just saying that, like, the point I'm trying to make is that, like, I don't think fact checks actually help a lot, even though they do. It's like, in some people's perspective, it's the fact checkers were created because of all the misinformation. And then other people could say the fact checkers were made because the truth started being told and they don't want the truth to be out. So I think if you take away fact checking and you just have, look, right here we're having conversation, people got different perspectives. Everyone in here's got a different idea of what. Some might want to do this, some may want to do that, but we're all human. So if we just have conversations and the right type of conversations, then in some cases, I don't think fact-checking is necessary. Other cases, yes. I can't think of the exact examples, but generally what I'm trying to say is that it's about communicating and conversating. And obviously, due to the pandemic and the way things were run, they took away that element of discussion, like face-to-face. It was happening online. But me, personally, I like talking on text, but I don't know what tone you're using. I don't know what tone. You could be saying shut up in a kind of sarcastic way, but I'll take it that you're actually trying to fight me, and then I react to that, and then you read that in a way, and then there's all this confusion. And I think that's been something that's been very apparent generally for a long time. I don't know how long exactly, but yeah, like, I think just to summarize, it's all about communication and, in a sense, cooperation as well.
And just to return to that question, which I think, Patricia, first of all, I'll go to that the gentleman brought up about, let's not forget what happens after an uprising, where funding goes in, but where does it go to? And as Franklin brought up earlier, the community is gentrified, and I'm sure most of us don't have a problem with an area being quote unquote gentrified, as long as we can be part of that gentrification. But
can I just...
sure, yeah, Patricia first, and then Franklin, I'll come back to you. I just wonder whether that has been lost sight of when we remember 2011, that we remember what, the media remembers rather than what is happening now.
Yeah, so I think, just to follow on from that point about facts and the idea that there are multiple facts, I think is really important. There are some facts where it's about perspective, and it's about who's looking and who's giving an opinion about that. And I think that's important. The question about what happens after these protests is really interesting. What we're seeing at the moment with, I'm not even sure if I'm comfortable with the term gentrification, because it suggests that the people who are there aren't gentrified. I don't know what that whole process is, right? But it's essentially about class. It's essentially about removing certain people and inserting other people into an area, however you want to look at that. And what we're seeing often in these situations, I think, is a kind of misdirection where we're told that, to look over there, but actually something else is happening. So, you know, we're going to make investments in a place, so let's just, you know, to appease something, but actually look where the money's going, or actually don't look where the money's going, you know? So there's this sort of sleights of hands that's kind of happening, where people are made to feel that, you know, the resources that they wanted to get are being given, but actually it's not being given to them. So again, this is about the way that power works, is that, you know, the people who've lived here, who've taken part in these protests, both physically, using all sorts of tools, are the one who've done all the work to show, look, we haven't got the resources that we need to lead flourishing lives. They've done the work, but then they're not going to get the rewards from that. And that is, you know, that is a thing I think that we need to kind of pay attention to. It's what happens to the people who have done all the work to protest. You know, they're vilified and made out to be sort of like senseless looters, and another group of people move in and gain the benefits of all of their work that's happened. And I think that is something that has happened time and time again. It's not just here, although it obviously feels very close because it's here, but, you know, somebody mentioned Brixton as well. It's a similar thing that's happening in many, many places.
Can I just make a point of what you said about the money, the regeneration fund? I actually had to investigate. This is how, I mean, it goes back to fact checking and stuff like that. But we also, did anyone who comes from Tottenham know they used to do monthly meetings in 6 Mile in Tottenham Hill about the money, the regeneration money? Did anyone know that? You did, yeah, exactly. So I went to one of the meetings and I was invited by one of my white friends, and I was astonished. I was the only black male in this meeting, and they were distributing 3.6 million at the time, and they were handing over like old buildings to developers and things like that. And they made the application process to get this money so difficult that you wouldn't find how to apply. You know, so I remember going to the meeting, I forgot the lady's name, and I said, why hasn't this information been distributed correctly across the community? Do you see what I'm saying? So sometimes, even though I know we have to leave it to other people, but sometimes we need to try to look deeper as to why this information is not given to us, so that we can then apply. You know, if I'm honest, most of the money, from my knowledge, was distributed to white companies. You know, Chicken Town, I don't know if anyone remembers Chicken Town, they got 300,000, you know, they ducked out, you know. So I'm just being honest. Like, when it comes to things in society, I mean, in Tottenham especially, we need to ask these questions. Why isn't information given in the correct way?
Can I just say, is that linked to what the lady here was saying about fake news? Because I do remember the headlines, and the headlines that you were going to get a lot of money, and you were given a lot of money, and the money was going to go to your communities.
Yeah.
And you could use it for your...
Etc. The money's still available.
What I'm saying is, right, there was a really, for me, I could see there was with my perspective and my POV, very strong fake news was going on there. Because you actually didn't get what you're supposed to get.
This is it. I mean, the thing about it.
I take the lady's point.
Yeah.
I take your point about the fact checking, but I think it's a broad spectrum. I'm mindful of the fact that uprising conversation behind August, because August then and August now.
I understand what you're saying. Just to add to that, what I was trying to say, and maybe I didn't say it in the right way, was that the solution always is that, you know, we have to do more, we have to investigate more, we have to do more. And I agree to a certain extent, except that I think when we talk about that, we overlook the physical, emotional labor it takes to keep being the private investigators, to turning up at these things. This is the stuff that creates the life expectancies and the life chances and the mental health problems and all that stuff that we overlook. And so you just have to keep doing more and more and more and more and more. So we just want institutions and we want people who are going to do just what they said they're going to do. So then we wouldn't have to keep doing this. So I realize that what I'm saying is the ideal thing, but it's like when I'm looking at what it's taken, and I'm looking at previous generations and what that's taken. You know, having a conversation the other day, and a friend was saying to me, when I was growing up, my mum was always in employment tribunals. I was thinking, what's wrong with this woman? Always in intro. And then you realise, and she's like, my mum was she was signed off, ill. When we take these things on all the time, the cost to us personally is so huge. We always overlook that when we talk about doing things ourselves.
That's why you can't rely on institutions, because during that time we had the Commission for Racial Equality. Your mum shouldn't have been in those tribunals making herself more ill. The Commission for Racial Equality should have been doing the job that it was put there to do.
No, but what I'm saying, it wasn't actually my mum, it was somebody telling me about their mum. But I'm saying that we keep talking about us doing more as if it's nothing. And it costs a lot.
I'll come to you as well. Sorry, quite a few people with their hands up. Quite a few people. Okay, the lady there, then the gentleman there. What I'll do is go to the ladies. We'll rattle through all these questions. Go to I think two ladies over there, then the lady over here, the lady back there, and the gentleman at the back as well. Yeah, just keep your hands slightly up, and I'll catch my eye. Sorry, so the lady there first in the grey.
I watched the BBC London News last night, and they were talking about 10 years since the Tottenham riots. And immediately after talking about, giving us a review of what happened in Tottenham, they interviewed a young man who they were quick to tell us was an ex-gang member, and he talked about being part of the rioting. He said that yes, he was part of the riots, why he rioted, and that he'd received a year for each bottle thrown. I don't know if anybody saw that. I saw that, yeah. Bulletin last night. And there was nothing wrong with that news up to that point. They asked him, does he regret being involved? And he said no. And then proceeded to go on to talk about his career since leaving prison, which is to go into schools and talk to children about not being involved in gangs. And my feeling is, if that is the way that BBC London News choose to report on 10 years after the Tottenham riots, there's nothing different to what's happened in Tottenham, the Broadwater Farm riots, Brixton riots. Nothing at all has changed. If we are going to turn what is essentially a response to police brutality of our community into the impression, it's semantics, it's like fake news, where the report suggesting that what we need, like the Scarman report back in 1981, is to pump money into these deprived communities. You know, these young people who can't get jobs, who can't this is all sort of a disgruntled community. This is not what the riot was about. This is not what Black Lives Matter is about. It's about police brutalising particularly black men in our communities, killing them. This is what we're talking about. We're not asking for money. I mean, yes, there's lots of problems. We do come from deprived. There are problems with jobs, etc. I agree with all of that. But if we choose to report on something like the Tottenham riots and send a message out to the rest of the country that this is not about police brutality, this is about deprived communities. And what we're going to do to appease these communities, like we did with the Scarman report and every other report that was done after the Broadwater Farm riot, is to say we're going to pump money into these communities to give it to our deprived and make them feel better about whatever. And of course now we're hearing that a lot of that money never actually gets to where it needs to be in any case. The bigger problem here is the semantics. It's fake news. We are reporting what is police brutality as being something different. We're saying BBC London saying, actually, this is about deprivation. It's not about deprivation. We're protesting about people in our communities being murdered. That's what we're protesting about.
Right.
And the only successful people that have been able to bring power to account have been people, the Hillsborough campaign, purely because the focus was kept on what the issue was. They didn't confuse the semantics. They said this is about police brutality and corruption. It took 30 years, but they never lost focus. They said this is what it is, and the only other person that was successful in bringing power to account was Doreen Lawrence, who refused to allow this to become about deprivation, and it was all about institutionalised racism in the police force and the police covering up the brutality that we were suffering in our communities. This is why they were successful, because we fought with power and we took the power away from them. They never concede power unless you take it from them. And this is what it's about. We are not about the uprisings as far as I'm concerned, and all three of them have never been about, yes, we have all our different organisations that talk about deprivation in our communities, and rightly so, but the ones, the Brixton riots, the Broadwater Farm riots, the Tottenham riots, this has been about purely police brutality, just like the George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter, was about police brutality. And the importance of social media is that, yes, now we can see George Floyd being murdered in front of our eyes, and that brought out worldwide protest, right? When people can see the truth. So that when you then report on George Floyd, like BBC London News, you can't tell us a different narrative, right? The power is about who controls the narrative. How many hearts and minds can you win? And it's about who controls the narrative. That's where the fight is. So when we can see the truth, that's why we got people from all over the world, black, white, pink and orange, whatever colour of your skin, saw the truth, the police brutality. And so what I'd like, my point is here today, is that when we look, at 10 years after the Tottenham riots, we don't get appeased by money. We don't let them come back and say, oh, look, let's give you, 50 grand and have like another little youth centre set up. It's not what, let's keep the focus on the police, because you know what? In 5 years' time, 10 years, we're going to get another Mark Duggan. More than one, we're going to get more. Because the more they can get away with it, the more they're going to kill our children. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, greetings and love to everyone in the building. That was a hard speech to follow. But my first thing is basically, throughout this whole conversation, I've been thinking about all the different topics that we've touched on, and the resounding thing that sticks out to me is accountability. And obviously, coming from a community where you don't have the resources, you don't have the organisation, you don't have certain backings, you don't have the support. It's one of those ones where it's like, my question is like, as a community, my people are from like out of Hackney, so all my dad's people, all my cousins, all come from Hackney. So obviously, as well as Tottenham kicking off, Hackney kicked off after a couple of youths were stopped and searched. We kicked off big time all up and down Mare Street, yeah? So my question is, as a community, as a local community, as a disenfranchised community, as a working class community, as an ethnic minority community, even though I don't like that term, how do we hold the authorities accountable? And like, how do we even formulate the methods to kind of execute it so it kind of fits everyone's roles? Because everyone's got a different role, whether it be online, on the streets, in an office. Do you know what I'm saying? It doesn't matter who you are or what your background is. You know, like especially in this nation post-Brexit, we've all got like a bigger share and a bigger responsibility in what happens in this country, what happens in our local communities. So it's like, that's my question. How do we hold these authorities accountable? And yeah, basically. Yeah.
Good question. And I'll get everybody to answer that in a moment. So if I could just get the other questions. There's two ladies there. The lady in the white shirt at the back, and then the lady in front of her in the cream dress. Sorry, the peach dress.
Yeah, I'm going to continue in the same line of conversation of that lady. My mom was murdered in this country, Joy Gardner, right? And what the media portrayed her to be wasn't like that. Because the news was reporting false news, because it wasn't fact-based. What they did, yeah, they came out to say this illegal woman, Joy Gardner, which wasn't legal at the time because her paperwork was in the Home Office. Bernie Grant helped her to put her paperwork in the Home Office. And if your paperwork is there in the Home Office, you couldn't be legal. So when the news came out, they put out a picture where they had stamped on her, kicked her, bruised her face, and her face was swollen. In real life, that wasn't how my mom looked. But when they came out, they tell, she died in her flat. And they took her to the hospital, had her on the life support machine. The machine was going up and down, but my family smelled her on the bed that she was dead, right? So I urge you guys were saying about like the vaccine and stuff like that. The reason why some people refuse to take the vaccine is not that they're scared. It's just that the information, they don't believe it, right? Because a thing like that in the instant of my mother, when the news came out, they put out what they want to put out, which it wasn't the truth. And if they put out the truth, people will understand about it. But they put out an illegal woman. They didn't put out that they gagged her, 5 feet of tape around her face, body belt, shackles, and all these things wasn't out, right? So that's injustice. So when I look on what happened to George Floyd in America, it's the same thing killed my mom. But pictures was there, people were taking pictures. But in my mom's case, there wasn't no camera, there wasn't no picture, to show the media what was going on. So even with Mark, it is continuing. It's going to continue if we don't fight for justice as a community to stop police brutality.
Agree.
I remember the case of your mum very well. I was a young journalist at The Voice. There were no cameras, you're absolutely right. But you had a very fearsome grandmother who, without her, the truth would never have come out. She was an amazing, amazing woman who I had the privilege of meeting and interviewing. Sometimes we stand on shoulders of giants, and your grandmother was a true giant.
Hi. I just wanted to highlight the fact that black people didn't create racism, so it is a struggle for us to fight it. That is one of the biggest issues that I have experienced. I work in the media. I've walked into newsrooms, Daily Mirror, Daily Mail. There is none of us in those newsrooms. None of us. I go into Sky. I go into Sky News. There's none of us in those newsrooms. So when we're talking about the narratives that are portrayed, and we have so much segmentation within the media, so we will get what we get from ourselves, but we won't get what we want from an environment that's not created for us.
It's true.
So I think my point is everyone has had something valid to say. And I've been raised in Tottenham, I've lived in the Middle East, I've worked in broadcast out there. No matter where I go, I am not a part of that narrative. But I still stand strong in ensuring that our voice, through me, is something that I think we have to continue to shout loud about and not be frightened, even if we are rejected. Not be frightened to stand alone if we have no one to stand with us. Because it takes a lot of energy, and as the educator said earlier, if we always have to keep fighting and exerting extra energy, we have the biggest mental health issue in this country as black people. Why is that? but it's overlooked and we are spoken about as if we are not human. So this is the issue. Racism wasn't created by black people. Why are we struggling to have this? We're struggling to have so many conversations. I spoke at ITV, and when I mentioned that if I'm upset today, I'm aggressive. If Sally's upset, she's having a bad day. So as much as we talk about all of this, and we're doing it alone, we have to work with allies in order for things to change. And we've got to make more of a voice in the media collectively and be in those rooms. Like you were saying, Franklin, with the regeneration money. We cannot be the minority in the rooms when our stories are being told and diluted. This is the biggest issue. So I don't know what the answer is. I am writing a book, and it's called Rise Above Race. But I do feel that there's a lot of things that we have to do collectively in order for change to be effective.
Hands up. I'm going to go to everybody. Remember the question the gentleman here asked about accountability. I'll come back to you there. Sorry, this gentleman first of all.
Oh, yes. Greetings, everyone. Hey, everyone. Thank you. My name is Motivation, and amongst all of this conversation now, all I can speak on is my lived experience. I am a young black man who's come out of gang affiliation, whatever, all of those narratives that surround that, and made a success in my artistic career. And through that, through the BLM protests, I used my creativity, I harnessed it for social change. And the BBC painted me on top of a bus stop chanting power to the people, and I moved a crowd of 300 people, and they were easily there to put my passion on the front of the news. And I had to ask myself, how do I really create lasting change in my community? So what did I do this year? I repossessed the building, a 32,000 square foot factory, and we converted it into a production stage, a creative hub and cultural exchange center where djembe practice was happening with ukombozi, capoeira. We had residencies, we had young artists being mentored to develop their craft and find a way to monetize from their creativity. We were able to pretty much bring a new blueprint through in how we can create sustainability in a local area, up to the point where the success that we have been able to move with has now threatened the powers that be, and they've put a court order to me. I'm now going to court at the end of this month, and they're now trying to stick me with loads of things, drug-related things, things related to basically just the common narratives, and they're trying to take it away. I have now had the opportunity in this moment to speak to a member of BBC to tell my story, and when it came down to it, I spoke to him about it, and he said, look, really the truth is there's not that many of us in there. They're going to dilute your story, and they won't be able to put it in the way that you want it to be put in. And I said, oh, wow, okay. And originally I met him on April, and we spoke about serving a special edition for the George Floyd Memorial, because the original footage they put on for BLM that they used was the same cameraman who spoke to me in that moment. He said we could use that to show the correlation of how your story has come up to now. When it came down to it, he told me, actually, BBC pulled it. Oh, okay, so how could we use it? And it's like, we need to retell a new narrative for a new generation around the Tottenham 10-year riots. I've put forward a blueprint called the Legacy Festival, in which we were working an intergenerational festival for a local community to basically activate all the local businesses and create a listing of events and shops so everyone's business could be regenerated. And when it came down to it, they pulled that story as well. So then we weren't even able to tell that story about what was possible with the 10-year riots. Secondly, the building that I have, I found out eventually that actually was valued at 3 million, and Haringey Council bought it for 6 million. And it's surrounded by loads of controversial spending of public money, and they want to basically silence me in accordance to that. I've created a blueprint that shows how art can create sustainability, economic empowerment, and mutual enrichment for an intergenerational level, and I'm basically being prosecuted and put in the front line. I'm tired. I've had to hold so much. If you know how much stuff I've had to go through, I've had gang members come to me and try and be involved in that situation because they think we've got production, we've got props for production, and they've got the idea around the ideas around music videos and culture. I've had lawyers come to my front gate and try and throw me injunctions in my face and tell me I'm going to prison. I've got letters to my front door telling me this is your application to go to prison. And all I've done is create a better situation for my people, and I've been willing to stand on the front line and say that I'm not going to back down from this because this is my truth and this is what I'm here to do. And in that moment, now I'm in a position where I need people to help tell my story in the media that's not diluted by BBC, and I have nowhere to turn to because there's no one who's actually willing to stand up and say, look, let's take this story forward as a hero's journey, because the new generation, they need to hear this and say, yo, a black boy did this. They created a solution. They've created a solution, and now I'm at a pivotal point where we've shown what we could do with a building. We've shown how it can be sustainable. We've shown how it can integrate and get the world to look at the value of what we can produce into an industry, and we've created our own, and we've called it the future black industry. And that has created sustainability. But right now, I'm facing prosecution from the powers that be. I believe I will not fail in this situation. I trust God fully, but I need my community to support me because I'm only one person, and I've done so much already that I've testimonied it for every single situation that's happened, but I cannot do this alone. And I feel like, honestly, like there's a lot of pressure on me at times, because at the end of the day, when you go to court, it's only you who's standing up there. And when they tell you you're going to prison, that's the same narrative they're trying to push to you. And I've had every single oppressive means that they've tried to use to push me down, and I've had to stand up strong further and further and further and stand in the face of that and stand by what I believe in. But right now, I'm being real, like I'm facing court at the end of this month for the situation. But this is a solution for the future. Thank you.
The gentleman right there at the back in the light blue shirt, and then I'll come to you. There was another gentleman over there.
Yeah, greetings, everybody.
We'll get to them. Sorry, yes, sir.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Suleiman. I'll be very brief because I know we're on time here. I'm an independent filmmaker, yeah, as the gentleman is in the front there. I've been doing this a while now, right? And as this other gentleman said about men like Shabazz, we fought the battle together because I worked on a couple of occasions. Now, the lady here was part of a documentary we made, Justice for Joy, part of a film collective called Migrant Media. So, as independent filmmakers, we carry a narrative. We carry responsibility. We carry responsibility for the voices of our community. Like this gentleman's story he just told us just now, there are independent filmmakers up and down Tottenham, up and down London, who could tell your story. Yeah? People who've been working in this industry, and we need to join together, because I said I'm part of a film collective, to do something or work on projects that we don't necessarily have the power to do, but we can do collectively. Dr. I'm going to be talking to you later, because I know you're contacting the Beeb, and that's my point as well. We have people in institutions who are conscious enough for us to work together for an independent narrative. And I'll just say that. I mean, as we said, we made a film, Justice for Joy. It was a battle to make, as you well know. I had to talk to Channel 4 lawyers over a term that Myrna used, which we were defending in the film, when she said the police had murdered her daughter. I had 3 days with the scripts, going through every particular line to win finally. Yeah? So it's not easy, but it's possible to be able to tell our own independent stories and work, if we have to work with institutions. But I would argue this, as an elder man now, these are younger filmmakers coming up. We're here for this film. We have this discussion because of this. And that's what it does. It creates a debate and more contacts, as somebody said earlier. We'll leave here today. I've just met, again, people I've worked with before. We will leave here today with more contacts to empower ourselves more. And that's me. I'll give it to you.
Come to you. Sorry, the gentleman over there, yes, you with your finger up. And I'll come to the lady in the peach shirt in a moment.
I've been waiting for a long time.
Oh, I apologise. Okay, after this gentleman and the lady there, I'll come straight.
Sorry, especially as Latin American, this happens a lot. And I'm just sharing my frustration in the sisters and brothers here. Just wanted to say very briefly one comment about the BBC And anyone that chooses to spin the story of the death of our people, they are not fake news. They are complicit in the murders of our people. They are not, let's not call them fake news. They are complicit. They are creating and perpetuating the death of our people. And they are choosing to not give validity to the death of our people. The other thing I wanted to ask is in relation to alliance that someone mentioned. I'm from Latin America. A lot of harm, guns, and civil unrest happens in Latin America and has been happening in the last 2 years. My question to the panel, were you aware of it? And do you feel inspired? Do you see an alliance on the uprising of Chile, Colombia, Bolivia, Chile at the moment? So I just wanted to check whether we can join that struggle together and fight. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, and I'll put that to them as well. So, yeah, the gentleman over there and the lady in the peach shirt as well, in the third row after that.
Thank you. I'll be brief as well. I would like to go back to one of your original points about who checks the fact checkers and the issue of trust. This might go counter to everything that's being said here. I believe that institutions is still the best option we have. If you go around the world, and I come from a country where institutions are constantly threatened, Brazil. If you go around the world where it's up to the individuals or individual groups, it's anarchy, right? I was in India last year, and it's very dangerous when we start saying that screw the establishment, let's do our own thing. I think what we're talking about here is changing institutions from within, but that doesn't mean doing away with institutions. So I would like your take on that, because you were more on the individual side of things, and the doctor here was more like it shouldn't be down to us. I believe that institutions is still the best hope we have, even though they have to change.
Okay, yeah, the lady in the peach shirt there.
Thank you. I've been coming to events like this for about 25, 28 years, where we have a group of black people predominantly talking about all of the injustice that's happened to us, all of the death in custody. I've been on protests, I've been on marches. We're always appealing to people to help us. You know, when we talk about the BBC and Channel 4, I've worked with those people. They don't give a shit about us. They don't give a shit about our stories. Their job is actually to take your story, dilute it, rinse it out, make money from it, and tell you to go bye-bye. They're not interested. So one of the things that I wanted to say about being an activist, because I have been an activist for a long time, is that when we come to these kind of meetings and gatherings, we don't talk strategy. Like, I've lived on my road for 15 years in Haringey, and last week I found out that there's a WhatsApp group, right, with the gentrifiers and new people that have moved in. They've got a WhatsApp group, and on that WhatsApp group, they talk about all the things they want to change in my area, and who the councillor is, and when the meetings are, and who's going to go, and who's going to write the letter, and who's going to draft it, and who's going to turn up. They're organised. Do you know what I mean? She's talking to me about, oh, we want to get a new bike stand outside. I don't give a shit about a bike stand, but I know it's going to happen. So what we don't seem to do as well as we could do, we need to learn from the people that are oppressing us. We need to learn the tools that they're using. Do you know what I mean? And we need to kind of regroup and skill up and strategize. Do you know what I mean? Like, when you look at some of the protests that have happened, like you look at Rosa Parks, it wasn't a 1 day or 2 day thing. Do you know what I mean? When you look at the marches that they had, it's not a 1 day or 2 day thing. We need to be committed over a long term for change, and we need to not be brought off, do Do you know what I mean? Or not to kind of say, oh, I'm tired, I can't go today, or it's raining, I can't go today. Do you know what I mean? We need to have a strategy. And when you made that point about people being exhausted, what's happened is that you've got a few people in the community that are carrying the bulk of the work. We talk about Dougie. Do you know what I mean? Dougie was out day in, day out, week in, week out. He carried the bulk of the work for the community. That's not acceptable. You know, we need to step up. Do you know what I mean? And we need to give some time, even if you can just say 1 hour a week, I'm going to do something. Or 1 day a month, I'm going to do something. You know, because we can't be looking to other people, you know, to kind of change our living environments and to do things for us. You know, and we know how to research, we know how to use the internet, we know where the council offices are, we know when the elections are, we know, you know what I mean, all of these things. We need to, I'm sorry to say this, but I think we can do better. We can do better. You know, and I'm saying that as somebody that has marched in Brixton. I know Menelik, I've worked with Menelik, because I'm a filmmaker, there's loads of filmmakers here today, do you know what I mean? But I'm saying that in terms of the people that are out there that are marching, a lot of people dip in and out. So it's like, I can't quite go to this protest, but I know you'll go. I can't quite write that letter. Oh, I don't really know how to find out, but you know how to find out how Netflix works. You know how to find out when the raves are. You know how to get your money together to get X, Y, and Z. We just need to do better. You know what I mean? So, you know, that's all I've got to say.
Yeah, okay. I mean, we are coming towards the end of this. I'm going to take just 2 more quick questions, and then I'll get the panel to ask some of the questions that were posed towards them. The gentleman in the blue, and then the lady in the red.
Yeah, getting back to talking about strategies, what are we going to do about it? I mean, I've had my tussles with the BBC as well. I was an intensive care nurse for about 30 years, and I noticed that when COVID came along, all the nurses, the medical staff, seemed to be white. I wrote to the BBC about it, and we went back and forth, and I don't have the power, so all they used to say was, we covered everything, more or less go away and shut up. So I do not know where to take, what the next move is, because what they presented was a very insulting, because I think a picture of what the NHS is, it's comprised of. You know, when it was the first shots of nurses to the rescue for COVID, all the staff were white, and the tabloids, the front pages of newspapers, and I think eventually, maybe a few days later, there was some ethnic minority staff who kind of got themselves photographed and said, we're here as well. So I'd like to know what strategy we can adopt to change things with the powerful BBC.
And the lady in the red.
I wanted to, I guess, touch on some of the stuff that's been spoken today about the misuse of power. And I wanted to ask the panel specifically your thoughts on where you see the future of protest in the UK. And I mean, I'm thinking specifically here about the recent Kill the Bill protests in response to the new police crime sentencing and courts bill. And, you know, we're here thinking, looking back 10 years ago about a landmark time of civil unrest here in the UK when, you know, 10 years on, our ability to protest and fight back is, you know, being stripped back, and our communities are being criminalized and brutalized. And, you know, the people most likely to need protest are the oppressed and those who the state marginalizes. So I wanted to ask the panel, are you optimistic about the UK and where we're heading in terms of our ability to uprise and our ability to fight back against the powers that be?
Okay, let me summarize what we're going to ask the panel. 2 very pertinent questions, 5 questions in all. Feel free to choose of the 3 other questions, whichever you feel comfortable with. The 2 that we have to answer, though, is first of all this gentleman's point about accountability, and the last lady's point about where you see the future of protest. Along the way, the lady from Latin America, South America, wanted to know the connections between the disturbances here and those that they've experienced, arguably revolutions sometimes in South America. And then there was the gentleman from Brazil who wanted to get your thoughts on whether it's institutions or individuals that will ultimately make the change. And then the final point by the gentleman in the blue there about, strategy. That's right, the lady in the peach and the gentleman in the blue about strategy, if any. Feel free to answer whichever of those three you feel comfortable with. So, Jake, you want to go first?
Yeah, because it was quite funny. I can't remember who it was. It was one of the first questions being asked, but I had an answer for that question, but coincidentally, more things got asked that could tie into. So this is kind of to answer a few questions of a few people. Sorry, I can't remember specifics, but I would say blueprint. I think everyone near enough, willingly or unwillingly, is following somewhat of a blueprint in this society right now. And, we are doing our utmost in certain areas to be good people. I'm not saying people aren't doing good stuff, but when you look at injustices and all of these same narratives that happen, like a black person getting killed by police because of racial issues and stuff, the reaction is obviously warranted, but because it keeps happening, for me, in my head and my logic, it's like we're following the same blueprint. And that's just, that is birthed from, I'll say, the people at the top. So I feel like, going back to the whole power thing, if we actually realized our power, we could change the whole blueprint, which would then change the narrative, which then I'm sure would make everything a lot better for a lot of people and be more fairer. So that's to answer a few of the questions. In regards to the lady from Latin America, I don't know too much. I have a few Colombian friends who told me about what's going on in Colombia, and at that time I was posting and raising awareness, but I would like to find out more and look into that as well. In regards to your question, I was thinking along the same lines as you, so it's not really an answer I'm giving, but more I hear what you're saying and I'm completely on board with trying to sort out those issues. And with your question about the protests, again, I would go back to the blueprint, but I'd say be very careful, because the people in charge right now, to talk about the vaccine, quickly, is they're obviously pushing it. And in my head, I'm looking at the comments online and stuff, there seems to be a growth of a pro-vaccine against anti-vaccine, right? And in my head, I'm looking at that as the biggest divide and rule thing right now. So my question to everyone, not that you need to answer it, but considering what we're talking about and why we're here, do unvaccinated Black Lives Matter less than vaccinated Black lives? I know that might sound dumb, but it's real, because if they're trying to push this narrative, in my head I'm thinking every single reason to protest right now, whether it's the feminist movement, LGBT, Extinction Rebellion, within each of those, you're going to have people who are willing to get it and not willing to get it. So where does that lie in terms of protest for the future? That's my thought, considering what's going on now. We really need to start thinking, not I'm not going to make your own decision, but just don't fall into the trap of following the narrative of the mainstream, because they really are against us and they want us to be against each other.
I have to apologise, but we do have to wrap very quickly. I'm going to get a quick answer from the other two, only because Ezu Carey there, he's doing a great job with the sign language, and Rachel, who was here before, have to leave at 9 o'clock, and it is 9 o'clock now, so bear with them. Patricia.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your really great questions and comments. It's really strange for me to hear about, to be here with Joy Gardner's daughter and not really just say sorry from the bottom of my heart that you have to experience that, and just all the pain and the effort and activism that goes on all the time. I think one of the biggest cons that we've been told it's fake news is that, these things have just happened to us and nobody's fought back, actually. And that kind of everyday activism has been so important, and I'm the beneficiary of that, and lots of people in the room have been the beneficiary of other people trying for them. And I suppose what I was trying to say before was that everything that you do is enough, and we're forever grateful, because there's this sense in which everybody keeps saying you need to do more, and I think that's right at a collective level, but individually, that can be so much, it's so much labour, and I think that's what I keep trying to get back to, is just a thank you for everybody who tries and everything you do, and forever, we're all grateful for. you know, because when you say that, what you were saying about the activism in 25 years, that falls differently on different people. The people who are doing so much already, and like I feel constantly like it's only ever those people who think I need to do more, you know. The question about institutions and versus the individuals, obviously in an ideal world, we'll have both, right? We'll have individuals acting up to change institutions. Institutions are made up of individuals, you know, and so even in our own institutions, we could be doing more. I mean, I hope this bit isn't being recorded, but is it? It is. Okay, I was going to say something about where I am, but you know, I mean, I'm in a very, very, and I have been, you know, as an academic, an outlier. Someone from a working class background, black woman, and you know, sometimes I say, and I've said, you know, just turning up is I'm here out of revenge, you know, I just turn up every day, just push it back on you, you know. It's just, sometimes change is you just being there, actually. That's the activism. That sometimes is enough. Asking more on top of that is so difficult. You know, I'm just hearing about even the writing of the letters. You know, writing letters is so important. That's thank you, because we all watched that, and I didn't write a letter. My mum was a nurse, and I was thinking, this doesn't look like any of the nurses, any of us that's been to an NHS ward. Those pictures didn't look like any of the wards we've ever been on. But I didn't write a letter, so thank you for doing that, you know. And I know you feel that there isn't, that isn't enough because we're not getting the change that we want to see. But I do, you know, I was really, really struck. I came to a talk by Gus John. I think it wasn't here, but Gus John gave a talk, and he was talking about the work in the 1970s that the Black Parents Association did to change the education system. And, you know, all of that activism has brought us here, and I'm grateful to it, but I just always feel that it's about the teachers and those people taking that on. You know, one of the people who sent the most appalling tweets to Marcus Rashford was a maths teacher, and everybody was shocked by that. But nobody who's been in the state education system as a black person is shocked. It's like, yeah, that's what happens. And our activism is important, but we have to have those institutions reflect on themselves as well. And maybe that's as far as we can take it, is to say, look, we're holding a mirror up to you to say, this is what we experience. But I just feel very heavy when I hear just the amount of work that's constantly needed and just falls on people's shoulders. And I always feel really sad of asking more of those, more. I suppose that's basically what I'm saying.
Franklin?
I just want to finish off by saying a massive thank you to everyone who came out today. I want to give yourselves a round of applause, because it's not, I've been to a lot of these. I was here when they done the Tottenham riots. I've been to all of these, and I just want to touch on the ladies mentioned about solutions. I think it's very important that we have a way to find solutions in all of this. Because sometimes we go away, we do these conversations, we go away, and then nothing really happens until the next one and the next one. So we do need to try to find some sort of solution and connect with each other. You know, like the gentleman there, I'll definitely take your details. I would like to come to your call day if I'm available to support you. Do you get what I mean? So these are the things that we should try to do: connect with each other, network with each other, and hopefully through networking we can become stronger and find solutions together. Yeah.
And like Franklin says, thank you all for coming out today. Thank you for all of those who are watching online. It's been a fascinating conversation. It's not over. It will continue. And I'll say one thing very quickly on my behalf. I'm not here to represent the BBC. I'm the chairman of Bernie Grant's Arts Centre. That's one of my primary jobs, if you like. But anybody who wants to come on the BBC to state their case on Sunday afternoon between 3 and 6 o'clock on BBC Radio London, then feel free. Give me a call then. I won't allow you to say things about recognise people or institutions because they won't be there to defend themselves. That's part of the rules that I have to adhere to as a journalist and that the BBC has to adhere to. But if you want to come and tell your story of your struggle, the lady who wanted to complain about the BBC Radio London coverage, that's fine. I'm on air between 3 o'clock and 6. I'm sorry? BBC News. Well, that's fair enough. Absolutely fair enough to come on and criticise that. I'm on air between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock on Sunday. And if you come on to my programme, you'll get a chance to speak, but you have to accept you can't just say anything, but you can. I won't cut you off if you're going to state your case and state your anger or vent your spleen or however you want to put it, or even just state the case. The BBC is a behemoth. It's not just one programme. It's not just one channel. And you'll find that there are people at the BBC who, as Patricia was saying there, have been fighting the good fight for a long time. I'm not including myself, but certainly many of my colleagues.